Hello everybody. Hi, I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm the lead weaver of the Transformations community. I'm so delighted to welcome you to today's session. This is part of a Transformations community dialogue series where we explore transformative practices to address global challenges. So today we're spotlighting how arts-based participatory research can reshape ocean governance. And our special focus today is on how these arts practices, contribute to social justice and knowledge co-production. So the Transformations community is a global network. We're dedicated to fostering sustainability transformations through action, research, and reflective practice. So through events just like today's, we're aimed to spark conversations that combine transdisciplinary research and practice and drive meaningful change within and between communities. So today's session, which is led by Nina Rivers, we would call you a weaver in the transformations community of the OceanHub. Welcome, Nina. And her partners and our partners at the OneOceanHub will provide a preview of what's to come at the Transformations Community's August 2025 conference in South Africa, where we'll be delving deeper into arts-based methodologies like amphitheater and their transformative potential. So I think Thomas will put a link to our website in chat. Feel free to delve further into looking at our conference opportunity. We'd love to have you attend either in person or online. So here's our agenda for today. We'll begin with a 6-minute video that showcases amphitheater's work, followed by brief presentations from our main speakers, Elisa Morgera, Dylan McGarry, and Philile Mbatha. Afterwards, we'll open up audience questions and then we'll move into breakout groups for deeper discussion. Finally, we'll return for a moderated plenary discussion before closing with a few next steps and invitations to join our community of practice around arts-based transformations. So let's start in by looking at this amazing video that I previewed last night. It is phenomenal. And I'm inviting Dylan to introduce it. Dylan, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Dylan McGarry from Mbatha, and what you're going to see now is a 6-minute animated film that took 5 years to make. It was a part of a larger research process, which you'll hear about later, but it was gifted to us by Sangomas in Durban, South Africa, who are traditional healers, and who've wanted us to share this story with the world. And later, this animated film ended up having some very interesting forms of impact in ocean decision making in South Africa, from policy and legal processes. So I'm gonna,
folks, if you could mute your mics, we'd appreciate it. Back to you, Dylan.
Yes, I maybe just the one thing I would like for you to maybe look for when you watch the film is to maybe just notice where scientific ways of knowing and indigenous ways of knowing can kind of sometimes meet in the storytelling process. But other than that, I'll leave it to you to explore and immerse yourself in.
Yebo ngani yami. Kungani unendaba kangaka ngolwandle thisha wami? Ngisayintombazanyana. Ugogo wami wayengixoxela indaba okuthiwa indlela yokuphila. Uyabona ugogo wami wayelapha ngesintu, eyisangoma. Wayeqondiswa amazwi okhokho bakhe ababekhuluma naye emaphusheni akhe. Uyazi ngiyakhumbula ngimbuza ukuthi kungani amadlozi ehlala olwandle gogo? Wonke umuntu unesikhathi sakhe kulomhlaba. Uma isikhathi sifika, sibuyela kokhokho bethu, endaweni yokhokho okuwulwandle. Emva kokuba umndeni wakho ukumbele ngaphansi komhlaba, imvula icindezela umzimba wakho bese ikhama umphefumulo wakho uze uzalelwe ezweni lamaphupho. Lapho ubhukuda khona kumfudlana omncane. Uba ubantu nomfudlana. Njengedlozi elisalincane, uzwa ingoma yomfula wokuphila bese ukhumbula ubuntu baleyo ndawo. Ubhukude wehle njalo ngomfula, ulandela ingoma yogogo bakho abakubiza ekujuleni kolwandle emsukulu. Ugeleza wehle njalo ngomfula, ukhule ukhumbule uba ngubantu nomfula, umuntu wasemfuleni. Uyabona mzukulu wami, yonke imindeni nezizwe zabantu zixhumene nezibongo ezahlukene. Imindeni yemimoya, isibongo sethu thina umkhomo. Uma umphefumulo wakho ufika lapho umfula uhlangana khona nolwandle, welula umoya wakho, uthatha inkumbulo eziningi zomhlaba, bese ucula zonke izingoma zesizwe msukulu. Olwandle kuningi ongakufunda futhi kuningi ongakuhlola, kuyindawo ebanzi ecishe ingapheli yemfihlakalo, ulwazi nezimangaliso. Ubhukuda ujule ulandela ingoma zogogo abadala. Uma ufika kumthombo wengoma, uthola ogogo abadala bahlala khona. Uma uqala ukufika, basuke belinda ukukwamukela ngothando olujulile. Bazokwazi kahle ukuthi uyingane kabani. Uhlangatshezwa ngokhokho wakho ekulindile ekhalise kakhulu. Lapho ungena uba idlozi elikhulu, idlozi lasemanzini, wamukela izinkumbulo, izingoma namaphupho abantu bakithi. Msukulu, uyokwazi zonke lezi imfihlo, kodwa-ke leyo imfihlo yangesinye isikhathi. Uhlala lapha phansi isikhathi eside kakhulu kuze kube ngolunye usuku, lapho izindaba zabantu emhlabeni zicindezela futhi udinga ukwabelana ngolwazi lwakho. Uzwa ingoma entsha, ingoma kamama olandelayo, uyahlabelela ukuthi umphelezele. Ubhukude uziyofika ezwini lakhe, uze untante uphume emanzini, uthathwe yifu likubuyisele ezweni. Ekugcineni umphefumulo wakho une emhlabeni, umama wakho olandelayo akuphuze. Laphaya olwandle oluncane esiswini sakhe, uyakhula ukhule bese uzalwa kabusha. Uyabona mfana wami, njengokusho kagogo, leli izulu wonke umuntu afuna ithikithi lendlela eyodwa ukuya kulo, alikho lapho izithunya zevangeli ezisithembise khona. Cha, liphansi laphaya, ngaphansi kwamagagasi.
Wow, that was so beautiful. Dylan, do you want to add anything about sort of how this is an example of amphitheater's efforts to amplify community voices within environmental governance?
Yes, I'll just briefly say, because I think I'm going to have some more space just now, but yes, this film really was an opportunity for us to think and work with communities around questions around intangible heritage, often a lot of decision making around the ocean is made around scientific forms of knowledge, Western science, and things like intangible heritage or like spiritual relationships to the sea haven't in the past really been included in our decision-making processes. And so this film was not just an opportunity for us to create a kind of proxy artifact that could be used to challenge evidence hierarchies in education and in law, but it also became a very detailed and rich collaborative research process across different ways of knowing, being, and doing, across different ways of meaning making, and across language. And so one of the most interesting parts of making the film was that we worked very deeply with biodiversity scientists to make sure that we represented all the species and the ecosystems that the spirit moves through very carefully. So if a scientist watches this film, they'd be very excited about the latest findings in the different biomes, ocean biomes that are revealed in going from the river systems into the deep sea. But at the same time, if you were a traditional healer or someone from a Zulu or Xhosa community, you would connected really strongly to the spiritual and intangible heritage parts of that work. And we were just as rigorous around that, around the ethics of representation and figuration of how do we represent this very sacred knowledge. And this film, along with our play and our radio play, was used as evidence in a court case in South Africa. And the first time art was used as evidence in a court case. So it's been a very extraordinary journey with this film and with our other theatre practice processes. But I suppose one thing that it really offers us is a sense of how to democratize research process and to commit to an ongoing call and response between different knowledge-making practices and groupings.
Fantastic, Dylan. Yeah. I wonder whether maybe we'll just stick with you for the moment and sort of switch up the order. And so maybe I'll kind of ask you to sort of expand on this and talk about, I love the idea of art as legal objects, and maybe you could also answer any questions that come into chat. So I encourage folks, if they have any questions or topics they'd like Dylan or any of the other speakers to address, put those questions in chat. And then at the end of all three speakers, we'll come back and revisit the chat and have more of a sort of open discussion. So please do put questions in chat and mute yourselves in the meantime. And why don't we continue with your presentation, Dylan?
Yes, I don't have so much a presentation prepared, but I'll just show you some of the, because I was very excited about responding to questions. It is one of the key fundamental aspects of our research process, is committing to being in this ongoing calling and responding practice of meaning making. But I'll just quickly say that Mbatha was created 10 years ago with Mpumi Ntombeni and Neil Coppin and myself, but has expanded into a very large and very exciting community of practitioners, from actors and writers and artists to traditional healers and leaders, young people, multiple generational knowledge, public storytelling process. And this very strange diagram became a very big part of the OceanHub design as well. It's actually inspired by a sea urchin. And I'm just showing this to show the kind of commitment to ongoing iteration and refining storytelling. So this is kind of a process of working with the raw materials of what we are struggling with, co-designing and co-defining matters of concern with communities, and then committing to staying in this open, ongoing relationship of refining and meaning making through arts-based practices until you either refine it to a point of getting to a very clear story, a final output or outcome, or opening up in a different trajectory and going into a different meaning-making process around other stories. But I mainly was thinking of speaking to or answering questions around three of the major creative outputs we made over the time of the OneOceanHub, over the 5 years of this this community of researchers, lawyers, artists, scientists, traditional leaders, artisanal fishers, coming together and trying to make meaning around how do we make better decisions around ocean governance. So the one is a play called Mkhosi Wenala. It's an entirely Zulu musical up on the border of Mozambique and South Africa, which dealt with the history of the Group Areas Act and social injustice. Lalelo Lwantle, which is really thinking about different people's perspectives of the sea and how it influences, how do we explore, make decisions around these. And then Ndlela Yokupila, which you've just seen. And if you want to watch that film closer, you can watch it on this link, but I'll put it also into the links. So I thought I'd just, in the background, just have some images of amphitheater while we were chatting and responding to questions.
Perfect, perfect. Katie Wooten, I see you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask? Katie, I don't know if you can.
I think I see she's asking. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to reinstall Zoom to participate this morning, so the permissions are a little outdated. I was just wondering about the case citation that used the ancestors' film as evidence. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes. So the case was really led by small-scale fishers and indigenous leaders in South Africa. It was to fight against a kind of developing process in which our government is selling our oceans a right to mine and drill for oil and gas off our deep seas. And this case was mining licenses that had been given to Shell, the big oil and gas company, to explore for oil and gas using a very destructive form of sorry, Ritu, could you mute your mic? Thank you. And this led to the small-scale fishers and community taking the oil and gas giant Shell and the government to court. And if that case was really one on their incredible testimonies around how this would affect their livelihoods, how it would affect the ocean ecosystems, but also what was really interesting, it was the second case in the country that really argued on the grounds of spiritual and intangible heritages, and how for many Nguni descendant peoples in South Africa and others, the ocean is a realm in which the ancestors dwell. And so many of the testimonies also described how mining this deep sea would impact their sacred connection to the sea. I have published a paper on this, a chapter. It's in a hydrofeminist book. I can put a link in the chat. It's called When Ancestors Are Included in Ocean Decision Making. And I'll send you the exact case number now, and I'll pop it in the chat as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Do you ever have legal scholars or legal researchers as volunteers with Empatheater?
Yes, we do. A big part of our work with the OneOceanHub was really to expand this aspect of both legal and extra legal work. So you'll hear soon from Professor Morgera, who is a human rights lawyer. She connected us with many different lawyers across different practices. So we've worked everywhere from with legal anthropologists to human rights lawyers and others, intellectual property lawyers. And we're always very excited to collaborate and work with volunteer lawyers. We work quite closely with Natural Justice and the Legal Resource Center here in South Africa. And we're just about to start a new big project called Isita Sabantu, which is looking at ocean and environmental defenders. And we're working with lawyers on that as well.
Would I be able to reach out to you to discuss that a little bit more?
Yes.
When you've got a moment. Okay, because
I'll put.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll put more in the chat where you can reach us.
Fantastic.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, and if folks could mute their mics when they're not speaking, we'd appreciate it. Well, we're going to have time to return to some of the issues that Dylan raised, so continue to put our questions and comments in chat. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Philile Mbatha. She's Deputy Director of OneOceanHub, and she's going to discuss the role of arts-based research in promoting equity and knowledge co-production. So I can't wait to hear how the hub works with coastal communities, including women and youth in South Africa, to integrate human rights perspectives through projects like the Mapping for Justice project. I'd love to hear more about that. So over to you, Philile.
All right, thank you so much, Bruce, for the introduction, and thank you to my colleagues for, especially Dylan, for starting us off, and we're going to hear from Elisa later on. I'm basically going to be sharing some of the work that I've been doing over the past decade or a bit more. And a lot of it started off as a PhD project, but then it evolved to a sort of research activist project, if you will. And a lot of this was made possible by the funding from OneOceanHub. And it actually set the foundation for quite a lot of work that I'm looking to do in the future, and the work that I've actually gotten to collaborate with many different actors, of which I'll be talking about, including Mbatha. And I always tell this story that when I started out doing my research, which you will see just now, looking at issues of, benefit sharing and issues of how do we integrate local and indigenous knowledge, voices that are always excluded in blue economy sectors such as mining, tourism, conservation, and so on and so forth. In a lot of this work, I think one of the stumbling blocks that I always came across was, so once we've done the work and we have the findings, then what's next? How do we take it forward? And a lot of people would ask me, so you've collected the voices of communities, you've engaged with them, how do you take this work forward to decision makers to change the status quo? And that always used to be a stumbling block. We will do like policy briefs and policy meetings with policymakers to try and communicate the research. But, it only ended at a certain point until when we started with the OneOceanHub, and we had this amazing collaboration with this network of researchers in the sciences, social sciences, anthropologists, lawyers, and artists, and we came together. One got exposed to a whole range of ways of actually expanding the work and using some of the work to create dialogue. And a lot of the arts-based methods have helped us do this. And in my particular case, it was collaboration with Mbatha that actually spearheaded all of this. I'm going to speak a lot about it just now, a little bit about it just now. We do also have links to short films that we've made that are linked to some of the work that I'll be talking about. So I'll put that in the chat. And maybe, Nina, if you have some hands with you, if you can just post on the chat while I'm speaking, the short film on Mapping for Justice and Umkosi Wenala, and I'll be speaking to some of that just now. So let me just share, oops, sorry, I didn't share my screen, hold on. Just give me a second. I prepared some slides just to give you a visual experience of what I'll be talking about. Okay, there we go. And I'll try and make it quick because I can talk all day. So a lot of this work is centered in this area. Some of you who've met me before will know that, I've spoken about this area for a very long time. And I still do a lot of work here because it is a very rich case in which we can understand issues, not only that are important for the South African context, but also that have issues that have global relevance, especially when it comes to issues around conservation expansion. I mean, I've just come from COP16, the biodiversity COP in Colombia, just last week. And, there was a lot of talk about how do we move forward conversations about conservation that don't exclude local and indigenous people. Because this has been a topic that I've been working in since I was a student, and it's still a topic that is very relevant right now. And this area is a very rich lens to look at these kinds of issues because internationally it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's protected under that instrument. but then at national level is protected under different protected area instruments such as marine protected areas, terrestrial conservation areas. But at the same time, there's a long history of indigenous people that have lived in this area, and they use a traditional method of fishing that has existed for more than 700 years. And a lot of this those customary activities are basically contested by Western scientists who have come into this area under the conservation lens through the World Heritage Sites and the other tools that I've mentioned, basically disputing these customary methods. But there's strong evidence that these customary methods have existed for a long time, and people actually know how to make them sustainable. So one of the things that I've highlighted, I've written a paper about this in 2022, where I highlight that even the notion of conservation itself, you know, it is an English language. And a lot of what we know about conservation tools is that a lot of the management tools for it use Western science. And we don't know much about conservation tools that draw from customary norms and principles of local and indigenous people in Africa and in other parts of the world. So a lot of my work has basically looked at that and how this legal pluralism that exists between state law that is driven by Western science and customary law through which local people claim their rights actually plays out. And how does that look like when you have multi-scalar conservation at UNESCO level all the way down to the local level? So this is the site. It's protected because it's considered one of the most unique sites it's considered to have outstanding universal value for its ecological attributes. And in some of my work, what I've done is I've also been critiquing what do we mean by heritage and culture at the international level? Because if you look at a lot of UNESCO documents about definition of heritage and culture, it is very Western. So for instance, when they talk about heritage, because these are World Heritage Sites, they talk about mostly monuments and buildings. So very Western definitions of heritage. And a lot of the intangible heritage that Dylan was speaking about, for example, is really not protected under these international instruments. But this is what a lot of local people identify with when you're talking about heritage and when you're talking about culture. So some of my work is also problematizing that, because if we're talking about outstanding universal value, as UNESCO says, whose value are we actually looking at, and who gets to define what value is? Because many people here don't understand what do we mean by World Heritage Sites. So this is just a little bit of context. I'm not going to say much because I don't want to run out of time, but I also want to highlight these fish traps that have existed for 700 years that you can see in the bottom image that local people use as a customary method of fishing that is managed through a customary system that has existed for over 700 years. So this slide was basically going to explain why I'm interested in this kinds of context, but I'm not going to go into it. And I've just said that I've just come out of the COP, Biodiversity COP, and one of the key themes that have been highlighted, especially under Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, is this need to recognize and respect the rights of indigenous people. And, you know, in a lot of our interactions with policymakers through OneOceanHub work is, okay, so we hear a lot that indigenous knowledge is important. We need to respect rights of indigenous people. But how do we go about doing that? How do we go about collecting indigenous knowledge, because it's so qualitative? How are we then able to use it in decision-making processes? And yes, it is a tough question. I mean, just yesterday I met with a group of scientists that were saying, you know, we have all this quantitative data that tells us to do ABC, but how do we do this with qualitative data, and especially with data from indigenous people? Well, this is where our arts-based methods have come in the OneOceanHub. Let me just run straight to the slide. This is just providing context of conservation that I've spoken about. So in this particular case study, we have we have two sort of like main uses of arts-based methods. So we have, for instance, the mapping work that we've done. I'm not sure if I'll get a lot of time to speak about that because I only have 8 minutes, which I've probably taken up 4 of them. but I'm going to hone into the play, and Dylan touched on it a bit. It's a play that I entered into a collaboration with Mbatha in this area, because like I said, we were stuck. We were saying, okay, you know, the South African government was telling me that this is the best managed World Heritage Site in South Africa. And I said to them, but have you been there? Have you spoken to the local people? Because people feel excluded, and they feel like the World Heritage Site is basically a perpetuation of their exclusion that started in the colonial era and during apartheid. And so how do we actually have a conversation about this to be able to somehow start a dialogue that is going to unravel some of these issues that are happening on the ground, especially when it comes to the human dimension of the park that is rarely spoken about, because a lot of the focus on zonations and mapping in this area is on the ecological attributes, but very little is known about the local people who actually have a very rich history in this area, like I've said. So in collaboration with Mbatha, we mapped out the history of the area. So in my PhD, I've done an extensive historical mapping of the history of this area. And one of the conclusions of my PhD was that if we really want to understand coastal governance or ocean governance, we need to look at history. Because what I was finding is that a lot of the conservation governance methods that I use now are actually perpetuations of what was there. It's almost like copy and paste. I call it new wine in old wineskins, because there isn't a lot of difference in how we're seeing the exclusion of and displacement of local people under the name of conservation. So there is something that needs to be said about that, and we need to start a dialogue with decision makers, because usually governments and conservation scientists, when you start saying these things, they think that you're trying to, you know, criticize them, but it's really not about that. Communities, local communities always tell us, like, look, we want to work with governments. We just don't understand why we're being excluded. And we also don't understand why conservation has to always happen in a way that excludes us, because we see ourselves as one with nature. We don't see ourselves as separate from the environment we live in. So it doesn't make sense that you come in and protect the fish and you leave us out of the conversation, because we live as one with the fish. So to cut the long story short, we had a series of workshops within this community to try and capture some of the stories. And we triangulated that with data that we collected from other sources, including decision makers, to create the play Umkhosi Wenala. And so a lot of my research contributed to this process. And Mbatha group had a group of youth that comes from the area that they put together, and basically using my work as a basis and a foundation for the play, we actually engaged in this process of co-creating this work. And the play has toured in KwaZulu-Natal mostly over the past year. And it's been really interesting to see how, I mean, I don't know if Dylan will get time to explain the Mbatha methodology when we're doing this play, is that we have the play and the audience sits in a circle. And then after the play, there's a post-play dialogue where everyone sitting and watching gets to share how the play made them feel. And we've actually had some people in authority who've watched the play who would have refused to engage with this kind of work come to us and say, well, actually, I never really understood that this is how local people perceive my role, whether, if it's a conservation authority or a traditional authority. So you can see how, the empathy that is created through these methodologies is actually quite innovative. It's quite an innovative way of creating dialogue in a non-threatening way to actually get people who will never sit on a table to talk, like local communities, conservation authorities, government, to actually have something to start a conversation about. So for me, that's been the strength. That's been a big strength of these arts-based methodologies. And in some of the work that we've been doing alongside this is we've been doing some mapping work with the communities. I'm about to end. Because a lot of the history of this community, like I've said, has been a lot about disposition and displacement of local people because of conservation. And this is something that doesn't come through when messages are being sent all the way up to UNESCO. And usually scientists tell us that, oh, but local communities or fishers don't have data, they are data poor. So what we've started to do is to say, okay, well, we're going to create maps with local people to actually map out, what this looks like on the ground. And especially because a lot of these communities have been displaced a long time ago. And we always hear about displacements, especially in South Africa, but we're actually mapping what that looks like and how that's evolved over time. Because history is quite important in the creation of maps. A lot of maps show what's there now and what should be there in the future. So for example, with 30 by 30, marine spatial planning, blue economy planning, a lot of the maps that are being used are just mapping what's there now and looking to the future. But we cannot afford to do that if we're dealing with indigenous knowledge, because a lot of it is rooted in the past. And we need to take that into account. So actually being able to map some of this, and we're actually writing a paper about this process because we want to feed it into blue economy, marine spatial planning, and other processes to say, this is how you map out social data from local people. I think I will end there. There's a lot that I could say, but I hope this has given an idea of how arts-based methods have been useful in the context of my work, but in collaboration with various members of the OneOceanHub.
Thank you, Philile. That was so rich. I think it resonates globally as well as within the context in which you're working. I think about the Taos Pueblo, some adobe buildings that have been occupied in New Mexico by this community for over 1,000 years, which of course is a blink of the eye compared to many places in Africa. But as a place that's a World Heritage Site, but actually still a lived community that is, not just an architectural space, but a cultural space. So I just love how the work you're doing and the work with OneOceanHub is doing has the potential for global applicability, something we'll explore at the Transformations Conference in depth. So I encourage everyone to put questions and comments in chat, and we'll have an opportunity to return to them. Right now, we're going to transition over to our third speaker. So Elisa Morgera is the co-founder and director of OneOceanHub. And so Lisa's going to scale out a bit and look, and she's also, by the way, the UN Special Rapporteur on Change Rights. So thank you for that work. So Lisa's going to share how OneOceanHub is creating art-based methods to bridge different knowledge systems. So I can already hear that in presentations, promote a based approach to governance. Over to Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. I hope you can hear me well. The audio was a bit interrupted as I was listening to. But great to see how, well, I think it's great to come after Dylan and Philile, after all that richness, and have my thoughts really complement and in a way, follow on from their work, because my journey with the OneOceanHub has been very much one of learning from all their work and how that reflected on my, lifelong work on international environmental law and human rights law, revisiting many of the ideas I had, and also realizing the incredible power of art-based research to really allow others working on law and human rights for a very long time to find a whole new, I think, opening of ways to make an impact and to kind of change minds and spirits in a way I never thought would be possible. And in fact, after over 20 years of working in this space, I was starting to lose a little bit hope that we could find a breakthrough. So maybe just to say kind of walk the walk I did in this process. When we started, the initial intuition from my side at least was to think about how arts and arts-based research approaches could help us to convey and put people like literally in touch with different spiritual and cultural connections with the oceans, emotional connections, and particularly like really surfacing intangible cultural heritage, which is often left out of both environmental decision-making, but also many kind of other decisions on important justice and social justice issues. And more as the research progressed, particularly in South Africa, but not only, as a lawyer, I realized how that disattention, that kind of marginalization of cultural rights was the very bottleneck for then the lack of recognition and in fact violation of participation rights and of many also economic and social and environmental rights. But what really happened when I had the first chance to witness, to be immersed, particularly in the theater-based research that Dylan and Philile carried out with many communities and knowledge holders, was what it felt like to place literally center stage the voices, the experiences across generations, the stories of those who are time and again left behind and completely left out of decision-making, including decision-making within the research community, and how you realize how those stories and those understandings, those experiences are relevant, and they are science, and they can be in such a fruitful conversation with other forms of knowledge and science that are dominating our decisions on conservation and uses of the ocean. The point that Philile made around the role of history, again, as a younger environmental lawyer, I also thought, well, we can't possibly, atone for everything that's gone wrong in the past. We need to, look forward and plan ahead and do better. And then the experience of, being in contact and living through the experiences of others through generation really made me understand and feel how important it is to learn as much as we can from that history, to take into account how the living memories of past injustices still shape today's realities, and that we can acknowledge, atone, and engage, no matter what our individual role has been in those historical injustices. So that sense of possibility and, again, empathy that really changes how you feel about things. And I think that empathy also means that we usually go into a meeting, into a conversation, already thinking that we know what's going to be discussed and already know what we're going to say. And, and then in the conversation, we might shift a little bit, but never really stray away from our script. But whereas when we are immersed in these art forms, we just look and feel about things we know so well in a whole different light. And we think about our own contributions in such a different way. And we end up finding ourselves thinking afresh, well, what can I do here? And that's where we're opened up to a whole new conversation. And so in a way, for me, that was that kind of the travel towards thinking, this is what needs to happen in any lawmaking space, be that at the local level, be that a consultation, be an EIA exercise, and even international lawmaking processes. So that idea of how we can connect with local, very contextual experiences, and we can learn and think back about what we're doing at different scales and really be responsive to those insights. And I think the thing there is both about the understanding of how transformative is that learning from other people's experiences, the possibilities to model alternative presents and futures through art and do what seems impossible, having young women speak to power, have children, have marginalized communities really sharing their vision and us responding to that, and also seeing expressions of grief and rage, and seeing how that's, which is banned from any decision-making space, how liberating that is, how it kind of speaks to something that we all feel, particularly if we've been in these conversations for decades, but we feel we can never express it. And once it expressed, it just unleashes our imagination and our transformative capacities. And I think ultimately really lightens up all our cognitive skills, and particularly those cognitive skills that, again, are banned from decision-making spaces: imagination, empathy, transgressive, I guess, to use a term I've used from Dylan, like transgressing silos, barriers, our own mental barriers, all the ideologies that we have in different scientific communities, in different communities of practice, be that the conservation community, the climate change community, and just open up our minds to something different that we can co-create with those who are in the room with us, who have experienced those experiences that others have suffered through for generations, that we now come to some extent, not only be ashamed of if we feel we have contributed to those injustices, but we don't feel like we want to push away, hide, deny. We are curious, we're in awe and we want to do something about it. We're drawn in, and we want to be somehow really thinking about what we can do differently. And I think very often people, and I've felt that myself, that if there's one thing you leave, we feel living from these experiences, like, well, at the very least, I have a very clear sense of what I do not want to do ever again, because I have such a clear, deep sense of how that's unjust, even if I've never seen it as such before. And that in itself, I think, is a huge transformation that we've seen in many other colleagues in the hub across the marine sciences, across social sciences and the legal sciences. There's so much that I've learned I never want to do again as a lawyer, as a legal advisor. But even more importantly, I don't think I can see any meaningful legal human rights work, both showing human rights violations, but also thinking about how we can build a human rights-based approach without the deep engagement with the lived realities that art allows us to, not just to know, but to feel and to have our minds kind of being changed through that experience. So I'll stop there. I hope the sound was still okay, and look forward to questions.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Elisa. Yeah, just why don't we pause for a moment, see if there's any immediate questions before we go into breakouts. And we'll just check in chat. Thomas, if you could help me monitor chat, I'd appreciate it. I guess there's a sort of a question just to throw out to all of you. So Elisa, Dylan, Philile, is there a kind of surprising impact that the Hub's art-based work has had on policy or community engagement? Anything that kind of came as a surprise to any of you?
Yes, I think one of the biggest surprises for me was what Philile was speaking to. I'm just going to have it in the background here so you can actually just see some of the context. But in this project up in Cozy Bay, this is in Pume, we were really, so this is, there's this, the policy impact is often seen as something where you try create a policy brief or create a workshop with policymakers and get them to actually change policy at a technical level. But in the context like this, where there's complexities between institutional structures like the park itself and the systems, the kind of colonial legacies of how it's managed in the background, and then the traditional kind of authorities and customary forms of law that are practiced every day, alongside the kind of traditional practices and kind of norms that have been embedded in between those two spaces. So in this community, for example, it's very rare for a woman, especially a young woman, to stand up in a public meeting and speak out and say what they feel about a policy. And that for us was, working with Philile, it was something she had noticed for a very long time. And we felt really what came out of the play is we actually created a character. While there's kind of magical realist aspects in this play that occur, the most unbelievable part of the play for people after watching it was a young woman, this character we wrote, who stands up to power and kind of asks kind of very challenging questions of the local authority. And what we saw in touring this play was, for the first time in our experience of working in that space, and for Philile, who's been working there for over a decade or longer, was seeing young women stand up and speak to the policies, speak to the decisions. And this really leads to what we're learning in this process around the kind of extra legal policy work that sometimes institutionalized techno-science is needed to change policy. Sometimes what's actually needed is to work with customary practices and traditions and maybe lock-ins within a setting. And how can you warm up those social spaces? So I think for me, that's one of the most exciting ones. I have another one I could use, but I see there's a hand up. So, and I don't know if Elisa or Philile want to also respond.
Yeah, Lisa, Philile, anything you'd want to add to that question?
Yes, I mean, I do have something. I'll just say, for me, one of the key things that I've seen with the arts-based method is how they I don't want to use the word neutralize. I don't know, like it's sort of like they even out the power dynamic that exists, you know, especially between local communities, like governments, traditional authorities, because once everyone sits in the circle and they watch the play, and then they get to have a conversation about it, it really just evens out the power dynamic. And I actually have to just quickly tell you about this example where we actually, through Dylan's idea and Taryn, who's also was part of the group, when we went to the FAO, we had a workshop with decision makers from FAO, WWF, International, and so on and so forth. And at the beginning of the workshop, we wanted them to have a taste of the amphitheater methodology. So we actually had to stage it where we asked everyone to leave the room. And then when they come back, they came, you know, we were like in character. So myself and my other colleague who spoke like local vernacular languages in South Africa, we started performing a consultation meeting in our local language in front of all these people from all over the world and Rome, etc. Because this was in Rome. And we, you know, all they could see was maps and zonations. They could pick up a few things here and there, but you could just tell that they were just so shocked because, and it was funny, the people that came in late, they didn't know what was happening. They just saw these two women giving instructions in a language they don't understand. And then afterwards we asked them, so how did that make you feel? And then we explained to them that this is how small-scale fishers and local and indigenous people in South Africa and other parts of the world always feel when they're excluded from decision-making processes. We wanted to give you that experience. And it was so moving to hear that feedback about how it made them feel, because they said, one of them said, for the first time in my life, I actually felt so powerless. And so it really was a nice way of starting the conversation, you know, by creating an empathy. So throughout the day, when we were speaking about those issues, it actually transformed how they could like receive what we had to say about this research. So I really think for me that is one of the crucial things that have come out of this methodology that I think other processes, decision-making processes could benefit from.
Thanks, Philile. Maria, you've had your hand up, electronic hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I think it may have partially been answered already, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about specifically when you say arts-based practices, precisely what that art is. In other words, I don't know, maybe we can call it like the different modalities or textualities or generic modes or whatever it is that you might use. And if there's a specific reason for why you might use theatre in one case versus the film that you showed in another, just around the kind of the practicalities around, you know, what kinds of art and when do you use what?
Elisa, do you want to pick that up?
I think this is more of a Dylan question.
Okay, back to you, Dylan.
Yes, thank you, Maria. It's a really lovely observation, because I think maybe I'll just take 2 steps behind that and say one of the big things that I've been an advocate for a long time, but I was given a lot of freedom with other arts-based researchers in the OneOceanHub to explore, is that I think artists often get relegated to being communicators of science and using their genre, whether it's theater or visual arts or music, to communicate and be like knowledge translators or develop translation protocols. What we were very interested in is arts are seeing artists as researchers themselves, you know, so that meaning making, that actually emphasizing that the making informs the meaning, and that there's this kind of iterative loop. By every time we make something, we develop further meaning. That meaning informs our making, and one can go on this kind of ongoing iterative kind of action research process. So one thing that we really look for was how are artists researchers in their own right? And how can artists research within systems of knowing that don't often or fall between the cracks of contemporary forms of kind of colonial hand-down practices of research. This leads to often as an amphitheater process. So we used a lot of amphitheater, but there were many other artists involved in the OneOceanHub that actually choosing the genre or the medium also becomes part of the research practice itself. So you're thinking quite carefully in relation to the context, the people, the culture that you're speaking and working through. So while some of our stuff we would use theater, in this particular play, we actually use more music and dance, and used kind of music in a very big way for this particular play that you're seeing in the background, because that was a genre that worked really well and could work with idiomatic reasoning and ways of knowing and customary traditions in that context. So actually researching the genre as part of the arts-based research process, researching what kind of medium might be able to hold that. And Laura Ellingson has a beautiful book called Embodied Qualitative Research. And in that, she really thinks quite carefully around finding and surfacing the medium should be part of the research process. So we actually don't go into a process saying, oh, we're gonna use theater or we're gonna use animation. I can show you in a minute also a virtual reality, a capture of a big multiple genred exhibition that Nina was part of as well. And there we used a lot of visual art, tapestries and textiles and crochet. It really comes down to how is the medium itself helping you, how is the making helping to increase the meaning? And in that meaning-making iteration, you come out with what Alfred Gell calls artifacts of agency. So when we think back at how we try unpack and understand an entire culture, for example, in archaeological records, most of the time we're actually looking at the art that people made, whether it's vases to paintings to mosaics, to textiles. We look to art actually to find and understand the agency of that culture. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful question because it actually becomes one in which choosing the medium and choosing the collaborative artists you bring into your process actually becomes part of the collaborative research practice in and unto itself. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. And that's a great point too. We have so many rich ideas to engage with now. I think this is a perfect time to move into breakout groups so we can delve deeper into some of the topics that are raised and pick up on some of the questions that are still in chat, that are still emerging. So in each of these breakout groups, a facilitator is going to guide discussion on using arts-based approaches in transformative governance. Thomas, I believe you have a slide that has some suggested topics for us to address in the breakouts. Yeah, it's coming on now. So, so each group, I would ask each group to appoint a rapporteur for a short report back in the plenary, just a few main points, key ideas that emerged during your discussion. Not a full summary, just the real gems. So here's a chance to share your own thoughts and experiences on the role of art in promoting dialogue, justice, and community engagement. So Thomas, Nina, Dylan, Philile, and Elisa are going to lead the breakout groups, but again, we're going to ask someone else to serve in this rapporteur role, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes or so to discuss the key insights from each group. So Thomas will stick you into a group. He's got it automation ready to go. And so we'll also carry these questions, these guiding topics in chat into the group. So everyone who's facilitators do copy and paste it before you head over. And we'll see you in a bit. Have a great discussion. See you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I see we're back. And so thanks for being a part of that breakout. I'm going to ask each rapporteur from each group to share a key takeaway or a theme, just a little spark, something that came up that was exciting, interesting, provocative, just to get us going here, something that emerged in your discussion. And why don't I start with my own group? Let's see, Maria, would you be willing to give us a spark or an element of our discussions?
So we spoke about, I guess I prompted it by saying, as someone who's in English literature, I often feel very insecure about the immediate sort of real world actionable outcomes that literature could have, because we tend to operate in this sort of high altitude theorizing sphere, or we just kind of, you know, talk about these almost ephemeral sort of things, but we rarely see we really witness ourselves kind of the impact that telling stories or whatever kind of forms of creative outputs exist have in sort of, you know, the real world, if that makes sense. So we just basically spoke about that, and then we all discovered we all studied English literature at some stages of our lives, and so we actually really do believe in the cause.
Yeah, I'm a proud English major.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, I wonder, why don't we go over to Nina's group and see what bubbled up out of that group.
Great, that'll be Jen. Thank you so much, Jen.
Sure. Yes. Hi. Jen Norens, based in Durban, South Africa. So I don't know if we really necessarily got through those specific questions, but we had some very nice interactions, and just as part of kind of our getting to know each other, somewhat address those discussion points. And I think probably the key thread throughout is just how using creative methods and creating these artworks, whether it's installations or public art space or theater and so on, that it creates opportunities for people to really engage in much more meaningful ways. It's a much more effective way, emotionally, and effective in terms of impact, in terms of how to communicate these ideas and really getting people to engage in ways that they would not engage with if it was just something on paper.
Thanks. All right, let's go over to Elisa's group. Elisa, did you have a repertoire?
So not Elisa's group, it would be maybe Philile's group.
Okay, Philile's group then.
Oh, yes, yeah. So we didn't really have a repertoire, but I think we identified a spark from what Mari said. So, Mari, if you don't mind sharing what you shared with us, because I think it sums up nicely what we discussed.
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone. I'm Murray, and I'm based in the UK. I work for Environmental Ministry in UK government. Yeah, I guess I was just reflecting that the governance, or sorry, this art-based research in its very nature challenges traditional governance structures, because those structures aren't built to be able to sort of process or handle that. And governments and sort of policy governance has been structured in such a way that it's there to sort of enact the will of the people and its constituents. And that's where this art-based research has the ability to make some really positive change, because that can touch on the sort of on the people and the emotions of those people who inform government and sort of governance decisions. So yeah, I guess that was sort of affect the people, and that will affect change, hopefully.
Perfect. Yeah, we only have about 6 minutes left. So I want to return back to our speakers and see if anything has risen up for them. So what do you think? Philile, Dylan, Elisa, Nina, what has come up for you in this conversation? And do you see some possibilities to continue and foster our collaboration and our connection between OneOceanHub and your work with Amphitheater and the transformations community?
I could probably kick us off. Oh, Nina, you got your hand up. You go.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Dill. Yeah, just one of the the points that was made in our discussion group, which I really, really loved, by Hair, which she's an artist. And it was just the importance of connection and relationships and building relationships based on trust. And we were just asking her about, how does she see her artwork make change in yeah, within society. And she just said it's very much about having her artwork out there and then people linking her with her artwork and building relationship with her and then asking her to do more things, and create more works of art in order to affect more change. So I think for me, just one thing to take away from here is relationship building. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Dylan, you want to follow up?
Yes, I just wanted to link something that Murray said and also Elizabeth in our group, because Elizabeth was speaking to just when you boil it down, art is really always just a practice of storytelling. And Murray's saying that, policy has done this practice of rarefying knowledge into these sound bites that can fit into a legal argument or into a policy decision. But I think the biggest thing we've learned is freeing up and opening up long form storytelling through methods kind of allows what Njaro Kulundu says, allows for the soul to show up in decision making and in research and in these kind of processes. So I think this kind of ultimate art form of storytelling and story listening is probably our biggest and most important learning from this work. And then just thank you all for the gift of your attention.
Yeah, fascinating work. Philile, over to you. Anything come up for you?
Yeah, I mean, those are tough words to follow from Dylan and Lina. But I think they've pretty much said everything. And I think, what also came up from our group in the whole conversation about storytelling, also, I think what Dylan said so powerfully was how storytelling has the power to allow souls to show up in whether it's a decision-making space or any kind of space. And we've seen that ourselves, even within the OneOceanHub as a group, because I mean, if I had to tell you the story of the OneOceanHub, when we started off, we had like scientists, social scientists, lawyers, and when we started, we were not speaking the same language. So art actually also helped us as a group to actually work in this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary space and to get to where we are now. It wasn't an easy journey. And we just had our closing conference a few months ago where a lot of that sort of like really manifested. And arts for me, I'm a big fan of arts-based methods. So they really just allow souls to show up to enable the empathy that's needed for people to have a dialogue and talk about what needs to be spoken about. I see Katie is asking about closing conference. Yes. So we had our initial funding phase was for 5 years. So we've come to the end of that. So we are basically fundraising at the moment for more funds to be able to continue a lot of the rich work that we started. And we actually feel like we've just begun now. So unfortunately, even though the funding is ended, a lot of our work has just begun. So there's a lot that we still basically building with our partners for future work. So that's where we are at the moment.
Great, Lily, and we look forward to collaborating with you both to get the message out, bring more attention to your work, and spread these methods throughout the world, and look for all sorts of cross-fertilization between all the amazing work that's going on in other places as well. And perhaps seek some tangible collaborative projects as well. That's something the transformations community is moving into strongly, as we want to develop funded collaborative projects with partners. So look forward to following up with you. So everyone, I want to thank you for being part of this incredibly engaging session on arts-based research and practice and the innovative work happening in the OneOceanHub. So looking ahead, I want to welcome you to join our efforts at the upcoming Transformations Earth Systems Governance Conference in South Africa in Kruger National Park next August. And we'll be exploring there how art can reshape governance and justice, as well as other themes around transformation, social justice, and equity. And we'll have a deep dive in the Amphitheater project and program and process. I'm looking forward to that. And so I want to extend an invitation to all of you to continue building our community of practice that we're going to be developing and supporting around arts-based transformations. So we plan to do more dialogues and webinars and collaborative initiatives leading up to the conference. And we also have what we call the Department of Magic, which is the place where we unconference, where we break out of presentational one-way delivery style and try to create more opportunities for interaction and engaging, deeply felt and heard and experienced, bodily experienced work at the Transformations Community Conference. So we invite you to join the Department of Magic. Just contact us, and you can also see an invitation on our website to join that exciting global initiative of people who are thinking creatively about how to do this work. So we foster both inner and outer transformations. So everyone, thank you. Thank you to our speakers, to the OneOceanHub, and all of you who joined. So we look forward to connecting you again at another Transformations Catalyst Dialogue Series event and at our conference. And wherever you are, have a wonderful night and day, and pray for the United States and outcome to this election that will yield us a progressive Harris administration. There, I said it, a Harris administration that will support the kind of work we're doing and addressing the incredible challenges we face as a global community. I voted and I pray for a good outcome. And so let's wake up tomorrow to a new day for the United States and all of us. So thanks everyone. Thanks for attending. And we'll
Thank
follow
you,
up.
everyone.
And
Thank you, Bruce.
thank you, Nina. Thank you, Nina, for organizing everything, and
Yes,
Thomas.
thank you, Nina.
And
And Thomas.
And thank you, Thomas.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thomas.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll
Thank
be
you for
sharing.
moderating, Bruce.
Yeah, I'd love this. We'll be sharing the summary and the recording soon, and we'll be putting things up on the website. So we'll have more folks getting an eye on this amazing event in the next upcoming weeks. And our collaborations are continuing, only just beginning. I can't wait to see you all face to face in South Africa. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.